In the dead of night, a mother's determination to build a better future for her children met a fate no one could have foreseen. Tynesha Holloway, a student with dreams and a fierce will to survive, simply said no to advances that should have been met with respect. But in a world where wounded pride can quickly become a weapon of unspeakable violence, that single word ignited a nightmare, one that spiraled into a brutal act of retribution. Imagine a scenario where a refusal isn't just a rejection, but a spark that unleashes a torrent of darkness, a tale where egos are so fragile they shatter under the slightest insult, transforming into deadly forces beyond control. Tonight, we unravel the chilling story of Tynesha, whose life was abruptly and mercilessly taken, leaving us to ponder, how does a simple act of self-preservation turn into a catalyst for unspeakable horror? If you're ready to explore this harrowing case, and to question the boundaries of respect and violence in our world, stay tuned, like this video and subscribe for more chilling tales of love, lies, and betrayal. Tynesha Holloway was a woman who refused to be broken. At 29, she had already seen more than her fair share of struggle, but she never let it define her. A single mother raising 2 children, 8-year-old Zion and 5-year-old Kalia, she carried the weight of their future on her back. Every morning, she woke up before dawn, got her kids ready for school, and then rushed off to work at a small diner on the west side of Cincinnati. The tips were barely enough to keep the lights on, but she made it work. Her real dream was to become a nurse. She spent her nights buried in textbooks, pushing through exhaustion, determined to give her children the life she never had. Her own childhood had been rough. Born to a mother who battled addiction, she had spent years bouncing between relatives, struggling to find stability. By the time she was 17, she was pregnant with Zion, forced to grow up overnight. But Tynesha never gave up. She fought for everything she had, and she refused to let the world dictate her worth. She wasn't the type to attract trouble. Soft-spoken and kind, she kept to herself, always avoiding unnecessary drama. But there was a quiet strength about her, a resilience that made her different. And in a city where women like her often went unseen, it was that very strength that made her a target. Demonte, Rucker and Malik Turner were the kind of men who took what they wanted. Both born and raised in the roughest parts of Cincinnati, they had learned from a young age that power wasn't given, it was taken. D, at 31, had built his reputation on fear, a self-proclaimed king of the streets who ruled through violence. He had been arrested more times than he could count, armed robbery, drug trafficking, assault. But prison had never changed him. If anything, it had made him worse. Stacks was 28, a shadow to D's fire, always following his lead. He was just as violent, just as unpredictable, but quieter about it. Unlike D, who craved attention and power, Stacks was the type to watch from the sidelines, waiting for the right moment to strike. He was just as feared, just as dangerous, and just as quick to pull the trigger. They were legends in their world, feared, respected, untouchable. Women were disposable to them, nothing more than a means to an end. They took what they wanted, and no one ever dared to tell them no. On the night of March 18, 2024, they decided they wanted Tynesha. She had just finished her shift at the diner, exhausted but relieved to be heading home. The night was thick with the scent of gasoline and cheap liquor, the flickering overhead lights casting long shadows over the near-empty gas station. Tynesha Holloway stepped inside, her body weighed down with exhaustion, her mind preoccupied with thoughts of home, her children, her bed, the brief respite before another long shift. She had spent the last 10 hours serving strangers, forcing tired smiles, collecting measly tips. All she wanted was to disappear into the silence of her apartment, to close her eyes without the world demanding anything more from her. But the world wasn't done with her yet. Outside, leaning against the hood of a black Dodge Charger, Demonte D. Rucker and Malik Turner watched her like a pair of wolves scenting fresh blood. Their laughter had been loud and careless before she walked in, but now it quieted, their attention narrowing in on her. D nudged Stacks, nodding toward her with a smirk. Yo, you see that? Stacks took a slow sip from the bottle in his hand, eyes dragging over her curves. Yeah. She bad as hell. Inside, Tynesha grabbed a cold drink from the fridge, rubbing her temple as she approached the counter. She was used to men looking at her like that, like she was something to be claimed. The streets were full of men like them, ones who took offense at a woman's independence, who saw refusal as a personal attack. She knew how dangerous their kind could be, but she also knew that survival meant picking her battles. When she stepped back outside, she felt their eyes crawling over her before they even spoke. "Damn, shorty, where you goin', lookin' that fine?" Dee's voice was slick with confidence, like he already knew the answer. Tynesha didn't slow her steps. She had no time for this. "I'm just trying to get home," Stacks grinned. "We can take you home." She kept walking. Dee pushed off the car, following her with an arrogance that made her stomach tighten. "Oh, so you one of them stuck-up bitches, huh?" she sighed, stopping just short of her coworker's car. She wasn't in the mood, but she also knew how quickly things could go wrong. "Women had died for less. That I'm good, alright. Just not interested." Dee stepped closer, his presence an unspoken threat. "You got a man or something?" Stacks chuckled behind him. "She ain't got no man. Look at her. She worked too much for that shit." Tynesha felt her hands tightening around the drink in her grasp. She was used to this, the game of knowing exactly how much to say to keep men from turning hostile. Be polite, but not too nice. Be firm, but not too aggressive. It was a delicate balance, and she had mastered it long ago. "That I just want to go home," she repeated. Dee's face twisted, his ego bruising in real time. "You actin' real disrespectful right now," he muttered, taking another step toward her. Tynesha moved faster, reaching for the car door. Before she could pull it open, a rough hand gripped her arm, her breath hitched. "What the fuck is wrong with you?" she snapped, jerking free. That was it. That was the moment it shifted, the moment it turned into something else. Dee's expression went dark, his nostrils flaring. "Bitch, you really think you can just walk away from me like that?" Before she could respond, Stacks reached into his waistband. The streetlights glinted off the black metal in his hand. Tynesha froze. "What you wanna do now, huh?" Stacks taunted, tilting his head, his grip firm on the trigger. Tynesha's heart slammed against her ribs. She raised her hands, her voice soft, steady. "Please. I got kids." Dee laughed, cold and sharp. "Should have thought about that before you disrespected me." Then the first shot rang out, pain exploded in her chest, ripping through her like fire. She staggered, her knees buckling. Another shot. Then another. 7 in total. Her body hit the pavement before she could process the agony, her vision blurring as blood spilled onto the concrete. She felt the warmth of it, the way it spread beneath her like ink soaking into paper. Around her, the world erupted in screams. Tires screeched. The scent of burning rubber filled the air as the Charger sped off, disappearing into the night. Tynesha gasped for breath, her lips parting, her mind racing toward the only faces that mattered. Zion. Kalia. Her babies. She tried to hold on to them, tried to picture their smiles, but the darkness was closing in too fast. And then, there was nothing. The news hit the city like an earthquake. One moment, Tynesha Holloway was a hardworking mother, a woman with dreams, a woman trying to make it through another long day. The next, she was lying in a pool of her own blood, her body lifeless on the cold pavement. The video surfaced within hours. Someone at the gas station had been recording, their phone capturing every horrific second, the way she tried to walk away, the way Dee grabbed her, the way Stacks pulled out the gun without hesitation. The sound of the gunfire was deafening, each shot tearing through the night, through her body, through the collective heart of the city. And then, the worst part, the laughter. Dee and Stacks weren't just killers. They were executioners, and they enjoyed it. The footage captured the way they stood over her body, how they admired their own brutality before slipping into their car and vanishing into the darkness. By the time the morning sun rose, Cincinnati was a city in mourning. Tynesha's family was the first to feel the weight of her absence. Her children, Zion and Kalia, had gone to bed expecting their mother to come home like she always did. But when morning came, it wasn't her voice waking them up. It was hushed whispers. It was family members standing in the doorway, their faces twisted with grief, their voices shaking as they tried to explain the unexplainable. Zion, just 8 years old, gripped his little sister's hand, his voice barely above a whisper. "She told me she'd be home," he said, his eyes searching for answers no one could give him. Why didn't she come home? There was no answer. The video spread like wildfire. Social media exploded with rage. News stations looped the footage on repeat, dissecting every second. Protests erupted outside City Hall, outside the police department, outside the very gas station where she had taken her last breath. Tynesha Holloway wasn't just another victim. She was a symbol now. A symbol of the countless women who had lost their lives for daring to say no. But while the city grieved, two men celebrated. Dee and Stax had fled the state within hours, slipping across the Kentucky border and holing up in a rundown motel. The room reeked of cheap liquor and sweat, the TV buzzing with reports of the murder. But they didn't care, man. They talkin' 'bout us on every channel, Stax muttered, a grin spreading across his face. We famous now. Dee took a long swig from his bottle, his feet propped up on the table. Ain't nobody gonna touch us. Ain't like they know where we at. They weren't worried. They were untouchable. Or so they thought. What they didn't know was that Cincinnati PD was relentless. Detectives had been working non-stop, tracking their movements, scouring security footage, piecing together every step they had taken after the murder. A tip had come in, the kind of tip that turned a manhunt into a takedown. Within 36 hours, the SWAT team descended on the motel like a storm. Doors were kicked in. Shouts filled the air. Dee and Stax barely had time to react before they were yanked from their beds, guns pressed against their heads, cuffs snapping around their wrists. The cameras were waiting outside. News crews had gathered, their microphones ready, their lenses zoomed in as the two men were dragged from the building. Stax kept his head down, his lips pressed together, but Dee looked directly into the cameras, a smirk curling at the corner of his mouth. She shouldn't have played with me, he muttered. The word sent a chill through the nation. No remorse. No guilt. Just arrogance. The city had demanded justice. Now, it was time to deliver it. The trial of Demonte D. Rucker and Malik Stax Turner wasn't just about justice, it was about a nation forced to confront the brutal reality of what it meant to be a black woman in America. It was about a mother who had done everything right, who had worked hard, raised her children, stayed out of trouble, only to be executed in the street for saying no. From the moment the trial began, the courtroom was packed. Reporters, activists, and curious onlookers filled every available seat, their eyes locked on the two men who had become symbols of unchecked male violence. Dee and Stax entered in their orange jumpsuits, their wrists shackled, but their expressions unreadable. They didn't look ashamed. They didn't look remorseful. If anything, they looked annoyed. For weeks, the prosecution laid out the horror of what had happened that night. Witnesses took the stand one by one, their voices trembling as they recalled the moment Tynesha was gunned down. The co-worker who had driven her to the gas station, now racked with guilt, described how she had watched helplessly from inside the car. The gas station clerk, who had heard the argument but had been too afraid to intervene, wiped away tears as he confirmed that Tynesha had done nothing but reject their advances. And then there was the video. When the prosecutor announced that the jury would be shown the footage, the tension in the courtroom became unbearable. Tynesha's mother, Claudette Holloway, gripped her son's hand as the screen lit up with the last moments of her daughter's life. The grainy cell phone footage filled the silent room. There was Tynesha, standing by the car, her posture tense but calm. There was Dee, grabbing her arm. There was Stax, pulling out the gun. The gunfire rang out. 7 shots. A woman in the jury covered her mouth, her face pale. Someone in the back of the courtroom whispered a prayer. On the defense side, Dee and Stax. They smirked. The prosecutor let the video play in full, ensuring that every juror, every journalist, every person in that room felt the weight of what had been done to Tynesha. 7 shots, he said, his voice measured but firm. Not 1. Not 2. 7. And after she fell, they laughed. The defense knew they had little to work with. Their only hope was to paint Tynesha as disrespectful, to argue that her rejection had somehow provoked the attack. They called on a so-called expert who spoke about how rejection can escalate tempers, especially in high-stress urban environments. It was a flimsy argument, and the prosecution tore it apart. So, just to be clear, the lead prosecutor said, pacing in front of the jury, "You're suggesting that a woman refusing unwanted advances is a death sentence," the expert fumbled. The jury didn't buy it, neither did the public. Outside the courthouse, protesters gathered every day, holding signs that read "Justice for Tynesha" and "No means no." Her name became a rallying cry, her death a symbol of every woman who had ever feared retaliation for simply existing, but inside the courtroom, none of that mattered. What mattered was the jury, and the jury didn't take long. After just 2 hours of deliberation, they returned with a verdict. Guilty. D and Stacks showed no emotion as the judge read the decision. First-degree murder. Life without parole. The maximum sentence. The courtroom erupted, some people cheered, others wept. Tynesha's family embraced one another, their grief and relief crashing together in a flood of tears. Zion and Kalia weren't in the courtroom, but their grandmother clutched a photo of them, whispering, "Mommy got justice." But as the bailiffs moved to escort D and Stacks out, D turned his head slightly, his voice dripping with venom. "No bitch can disrespect me and walk away," he muttered. Even in chains, he still believed he had won, and that was the most terrifying part of all. Zion sat in silence, his small hands folded in his lap, staring at nothing. The world around him moved, but he felt stuck in place, trapped in the moment he learned his mother was never coming home. He was only 8, but in a way, he felt much older. At school, he barely spoke. His teachers tried to coax him into participating, but he would only nod or shake his head. At recess, while the other children played tag, he sat alone, watching the trees sway in the wind. At night, he lay awake, straining to hear the sound of his mother's voice, but all that greeted him was silence. Kalia, at 5, couldn't fully understand. She still expected her mother to walk through the door. Every time the front door creaked open, her eyes would light up, only to dim with disappointment when it wasn't Tynesha. She would crawl into bed beside her grandmother, her tiny hands clutching the fabric of Denise's nightgown. "Mommy's just at work, right?" she whispered one night, her voice fragile with hope. Denise swallowed hard, forcing back tears. "Go to sleep, baby," but Kalia wasn't ready to let go. She clung to memories, to familiar scents, to the lullabies Tynesha used to sing. When no one was watching, she would press her face against her mother's old sweaters, inhaling deeply, desperate to keep the smell from fading. Denise did her best to hold everything together, but grief settled over her like a heavy weight. At night, when the house was quiet, she would sit at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair where Tynesha used to sit, sipping coffee, talking about the future. She had been working towards something, a better life, a safer home, bigger dreams. Now, all those dreams were buried with her. Outside their home, the city roared with anger. The video of Tynesha's murder had not been forgotten. Protests filled the streets. Women held up signs, their voices raw with fury. "No means no, not murder, stop killing us." Her name was Tynesha Holloway. Social media flooded with her image, smiling, vibrant, full of life. News anchors debated what needed to change. Politicians made promises, tougher laws, better protections, but to Denise, it all rang hollow. "Where was this energy when my daughter was alive?" she asked reporters. "She should be here. She should be raising her kids," but the world didn't work that way. People only cared after it was too late. In prison, D and Stacks quickly learned they were no longer in control. Stacks fell in line with a gang, blending into the shadows, avoiding attention. D, however, still carried himself with the arrogance of a man who believed he couldn't be touched, but prison wasn't the street's point. One night, in the dimly lit showers, 4 men surrounded him. No words were exchanged. They didn't kill him, but they made sure he would never hold power again. When news of the attack leaked online, the internet reacted with a mix of satisfaction and indifference. Justice, some people called it karma, others said that it didn't bring Tynesha back. Years passed. Zion and Kalia grew up with only fragments of memories, her laughter, the scent of her perfume, the warmth of her embrace. They pieced together the truth in whispers at family gatherings, in old news clippings, in the expressions on people's faces when they heard their last name. Zion carried the weight of her murder like an invisible burden, pushing himself to be strong so no other child would have to grow up motherless. Kalia kept a picture of her mother by her bedside, tracing the outline of her face each night before falling asleep, and the world moved on, new names replaced old ones. New tragedies took center stage. New protests rose, demanding justice for another stolen life, but for those who loved Tynesha, the loss never faded. She wasn't a hashtag, she wasn't a headline, she was a mother, and she should still be here. Tynesha Holloway's murder was more than a tragedy, it was a brutal reminder of the dangers women face every day for simply existing. A single word, no, should never be a death sentence. But in a world where entitlement festers, where fragile egos explode into violence, saying no can mean the difference between life and death. Her story is not unique. It joins a long list of women who have been harassed, attacked, or murdered for rejecting unwanted attention. It is a cycle that repeats itself, over and over, with different names, different faces, but the same horrifying outcome. Tynesha should still be here. She should still be tucking her children into bed, still chasing her dreams, still waking up to new mornings filled with possibilities. Instead, she is another life stolen too soon, another mother gone, another family shattered beyond repair. So the question remains, how do we stop this from happening again? How do we raise men who understand that rejection is not humiliation, that a woman's autonomy is not an insult, that no means no? How do we build a world where women don't have to fear for their lives when they simply want to be left alone? The conversation can't end here. Change doesn't come from silence. If Tynesha's story shook you, if her name lingers in your mind, don't let it fade. Keep talking. Keep demanding better. Keep fighting for a world where no woman has to die for her right to say no. If you believe stories like this need to be told, like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Together, we can expose the darkest intersections of love, power, and violence, and push for a world where justice isn't just a word, but a reality.